Good late Thursday, early Friday. Meteorologist Casey Cloud here in the Weather Center right now, giving a look at that Doppler perspective across the region. We're not seeing too much from sound off the west coast, off the east coast there, but really not anything of concern at this point in time. Those temperatures here are pretty nice again toward the nighttime hours. Maybe not quite as cool as what we're seeing here. Some of the previous nights, we're starting to see some more moisture to some degree here, and there's dew points, or something. That's a good indicator of moisture in the lower levels, and they are increasing some. And I'll look at my thermometer here right now, east of Stark. We're 67 degrees, my rural area. So that kind of tells the story. I know we were getting down there in the lower 60s here the last couple mornings. We may, approach there, maybe like 64 or something, but maybe not exactly getting down as cool as we've been getting. But, in the afternoon it's been getting warm. We're going to start seeing more moisture in those lows at night. It'll start warming up some. Another thing that's important to see on here, that general thunderstorm outlook for your Friday here, as we look ahead, just coming out of the last little bit from the Storm Prediction Center there in Norman, Oklahoma. There's no severe risk here per se for our area. And, we have thunderstorm risk all the time, but my point is most of our area isn't really seeing much of a risk for thunderstorms impacting those high school football games on your Friday. But, our Bradford tornadoes heading down there toward South Sumter there in towards Sumter County. I know some folks call it Bushnell, some folks call it Bushnell, and down there is a thunderstorm risk. Not an overwhelming one. It's about a 40% risk of some rainfall. So, still not too bad, but compared to everywhere else, in our area, Sumter's technically just outside of the area, there is a chance for some storm activity there. Bradford Tornadoes, the football team from Stark, going to be traveling down to Sumter County there to take on the South Sumter Raiders. So, let me go ahead and kind of put up some of the forecast model information here as we kind of look ahead there in toward the timeline. I'll progress things out, and we'll see here. I'll zoom out just a little bit, see, because, I want to show you guys, and it's really because, there is a chance for storm accident not being the exact spots of what the models are predicting. So this is one view here from around 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock here. And it's not progressing any further on this, but you can kind of see that's actually 5 o'clock. So let me go ahead, and then I have to back it up to a previous run that's longer. So I'm going to take this off real quick. We saw there was some storm accident. There's some storm accident now off the west coast there. So let me go ahead and back this up in our runs, because the 0Zs, 6Zs, 12Zs, 18Zs, they go longer. So let me go to 7 p.m. on the 0Z, and you do see some accident in North Citrus County. So doesn't mean, that's going to be in Citrus. It could be just placed a little from what the model suggesting. It could be in Sumter County. So we'll just have to watch there. I'm talking about areas outside of our area because Bradford is going down there, and there is at least a little bit of a concern for some Saturday storms. You see something showing in Citrus on this model around Lecanto there. As we're looking at things, you see something down there south of Zephyr Hills. So we'll have to watch. You see the current radar again. There's some accent there now. You see a lot less coverage within our 62 counties here. Most of our games that are played within our coverage zone should be all right. Probably okay in Sumter, but just a little bit of a higher risk than, other places here for some shower and storm accident. Again, about 40% chance there for that game for Bradford there. So that's the storyline. Both teams undefeated. Should be a good one. I mean, both teams are pretty highly thought of here in the state. And, maybe Bradford a little bit higher in terms of some of the metrics, but then going down there, that's a pretty long trip. So, definitely a game that could be, one that's pretty close. We shall see. I don't know, it'll be close, and it really wasn't, but I think South Sumter's even better than them, but based on what I've seen, reading through some of the different scores and the like. So, let me go ahead and put on another model, though. We're going to zoom back out. So we're going to zoom way out, in fact. Let's do something here, and this may get kind of interesting because we do have some of the hurricane models here, and, the GFSs in here where they're, the statistical plots are here. And this is something we have to monitor because we do have an area that's expected to become Gabrielle here in the tropics. I'm not turning the logo red. I'm not, overly concerned yet because there's a lot of different things here that have to occur for this to be a local threat for one, it's got to keep going further south. Some of the indications are that it might do that, but there's a chance, if it did keep going south, it could be an issue for Puerto Rico, definitely a possibility. But then also there's a chance, we haven't had this in a while, but, looking back over years, we have areas here around the Dominican Republic and Haiti where we have those mountainous zones here. That terrain could break it up even if it were to kind of take a path that were to eventually get closer toward our neck of the woods here. So again, we're just going to have to kind of wait and see as we're tracking things in toward the weather center with the tropics here. So let me go ahead and put on the GFS, the forecast information. This is going to go way out here. I'm not going to go all the way, but this is going to be your latest run here, and you'll just kind of watch it kind of, be kind of close to some of those lines / just dots, really, the pink, the blue, the green here. I mean, as you kind of watch here, and those are the statistical, data that's coming in. But then this is actually a view of it here, a little bit more, in terms of the simulation. So you kind of watch it here, and then you see here that it's going even further south than some of those plots here on this map at least. And then as you kind of take this further on out here, we have it getting out there a little bit closer, maybe toward Puerto Rico, or maybe again the Dominican Republic and Haiti. But the thing is, this is 240 hours out. This is as far as my system will let me plot. If you go out further, there, there's a chance it could come closer toward Florida, or it could kind of curve up away from the U.S. Maybe it curves up first, before it even gets this far into the islands there, and into Puerto Rico, and the Dominican Republic and Haiti. So there's a lot of ifs here, because it could just recurve altogether. It could kind of stay down there and then get broken up, but it also could kind of hold together and be a concern. I mean, this is far out, though. I mean, this is going all the way to the night of the 14th here, folks. I mean, this is only the 5th. We're on here pretty late in the night. The 14th, the night of the 14th, that's Sunday night, the 14th. That's not this coming Sunday. That's a week from Sunday, going into Monday there. And our, system is suggesting it might be west of Puerto Rico at that point. So there's a lot of time to watch this. There could be a lot of changes, even in the pattern further west by then. It, very well could be like Aaron, a recurve, especially if it's further north. But some of these early indicators are concerning, because what these indicate here, and unlike Aaron, where some of these were just curving it way early, we were feeling pretty good very early on. We may have to wait a little while with this one. We may not ever feel good. It might end up coming closer toward our area. That's not off the table here, but it would be a while. But these numbers here are the category of the hurricane based on these models. So that is concerning. The hurricane model here, that does generally pretty well with intensity. I mean, we always have to have a certain amount of data in all these, and it's so early it hadn't formed, we just don't know. But that's on a category 4. That's very concerning in just the thought of it. But does it recurve? Does it hit Puerto Rico or something like that? That'd be really bad, obviously, after what they had with Maria. Hurricane Maria going back several years now. I mean, you just never know. This is way, way, way early, and I don't want to hype this up yet. We're not turning the logo red yet. We're just, not even close to being there, really, with that. I mean, because we're just so far out of the time. This is kind of a timeline. This is kind of a slow mover, and it's something it's seemingly, just taking its time here. We've had storms that are long, trackers like Irma over the years. So we gotta be careful. I'm not saying this is Irma by any stretch here, but the point is, this is something that's kind of going to be moving pretty slow. It's going to be a storyline for a while if it doesn't become obvious in the models that it's going to recurve. This is a very, slow progression, really. I mean, to be all the way out there, this is something a little bit quicker. The TVCN, for what it's worth, is showing it next Thursday, a week from tonight, being out here versus what the GFS was showing, taking all the way to like, Sunday night to get out here. So we shall see, but this is still pretty far out. This is, this is going to be, it's at least 10 days away from Florida here. That's for sure, as we're tracking things. Probably a little bit longer than that, probably closer to 14, but let's just say, somewhere in that range, at least 10 days away. So don't stress out about this. It's, not time to panic. That's always important in hurricane season to have your hurricane kit up to date. Again, this is not, something that's, as of now, an overwhelming concern, but by next Tuesday, when I say next Tuesday, I kind of mean this coming Tuesday when I say it like that, Tuesday night, Wednesday update, by then we might be a lot more concerned. It's possible, or we might be able to kind of almost write it off and say, nope, it's going to recurve, we're good. Now, Bermuda might have to watch, maybe some areas further north have to watch, like what we said with Aaron. It didn't really, end up being that big of a concern overall there, but we got to pay attention with this one for now. Don't lay your guard down. It could end up being a real big deal. But right now, it's way, way early. We're just speculating. Some models are saying a concern, some are saying not. Some are showing a week in a while, and then ultimately becomes something a little bit more, robust. Again, as it comes toward Florida, maybe not overwhelming. We've had so many hurricanes here in recent years, obviously. So you just never know here. You just never know in terms of this. So, it could be one of those where in a bad situation, it might be good for Puerto Rico and Hispaniola, but if it rides south of there and then kind of curves back up and doesn't hit as much land, then that could be an issue. I know we've seen situations like that with Irma, for instance. So we got to pay attention to this. You can't let your guard down. You got to be vigilant here for sure in this type of scenario. This is one we do really have to pay attention to as we're looking at things and as we're tracking things for now. But again, we might be able to write it off by next week, or we might really start to get concerned. So I think that's enough about that. We have way more, imminent type of things to get to here for now. In terms of our local weather, we will get to those in a moment. We have an area out there, a tropical system that bringing some moisture trying to anywhere to the southwest. It may not, have as much of that down there now. The track kind of shifting around some. There's a flash flood warning though still toward Yuma County. They've had a lot of moisture there. Let's put on some satellite for us here. You can kind of see, well, right down there, not so much with some of this. As they go back 4 hours, you see a lot of moisture spreading out there as we're tracking things and the overall pattern. Now, let me go ahead and switch to the eastern satellite here. We do have an area to watch out here. Again, the one we've been talking about. We'll wait and see on that in terms of, what type of updates, will need to be provided here. But let's go ahead and go to the Pacific. Let me switch over to the West Coast satellite here, West Satellite per se. And you do have a hurricane in the Pacific, and that's going to be a concern in the Central Pacific for Hawaii potentially. Though it's still weakened quite a bit, especially if it goes for the north, some cooler waters. We could have Tropical Storm Kiko there impacting Hawaii there as we're getting into like Tuesday, Wednesday here. So that's less than a week away. They are in the cone of concern for what, right now the hurricane, but expected to weaken quite a bit down to a tropical storm. Might come pretty close to Honolulu as a tropical storm, but it's really, really early here in terms of this because if it goes quite a bit north, then they might not have that much of an impact. But if it kind of takes more of that pink type of dot trail there, and that's, closer to what the Hurricane Center has, and that would be an issue. Could cause some flooding there, could cause some problems. I know the south side isn't always the, most concerning side here, but in this type of situation, there definitely would be some concern. Let me put on the American model for this here. We'll kind of progress this on out, and you'll be able to see I put it on there for, let me check my date here, the 8th. So the 8th is that Monday. And we'll go ahead and kind of say what the GFS, the latest runner, that's showing. And it's showing a situation where you do have some moisture coming on in, but it is weakening a good bit, which is what we like to see. A lot of that is still staying in the north, but it would definitely have some impacts, pick up the winds there some as we're tracking. But that kind of takes the winds a little north. I'll back this up just a little bit here. You see, it's not that far away from being a bigger issue, though, as we're looking as they go forward here in the timeline. I'm going to have to watch very carefully because, it's something, if it shifts south, it would be a direct tropical storm impact. Not a hurricane, probably, but a tropical storm, which could still be an issue. It is one that has to weaken down, though, so we'll watch that as we're tracking things. Let's go ahead and go back to our home view for a second. And you see here our risk outlook here, and that's just general thunderstorm. But as we get up toward the north, I know we had, some tornado warnings popping up on that Thursday in a few spots in the country. You can see that dark green there, a marginal risk of severe weather. That yellow there, you can see a slight risk. So, and let me go ahead and pull up. There's a small tornado risk. And we had a tornado warning in the Knoxville TV market on that Thursday. We had one up in New York State, up toward Utica TV market, I believe. And then just seeing some of that concern up in Minnesota with a rogue warning as well. So, And we even had that weather delay there with that first regular season NFL game. Lightning, not severe weather, but lightning there around Philadelphia. Philadelphia winning there against the Dallas Cowboys. But as you can see here, that green, a marginal risk of tornadic activity, Nashville, Cookeville, and Tennessee. Getting to Kentucky there, Lexington to the University of Kentucky. Pikeville's in there. You get up into West Virginia, Charleston, Parkersburg, West Virginia as well. So, and even see Willen there in West Virginia. So, a small risk of tornadoes on that Friday there. So, we'll be watching that. We'll be tracking that. There's also a severe warning in Kansas right now. So, north of Dodge City, we have a warning. This is in the middle of the night, of course, and this goes until 2 a.m. Central for portions of Finney and Hodgman counties. We do have a risk there of some damage in wind gusts there and some penny-sized hail. So we're watching that in toward the Midwest here at this point in time. Now we're going ahead and bringing it back to the home view. We are going to keep watching the tropics, obviously. We do have that chance. It's about 90% now within 7 days of this forming. Probably end up becoming something that, at least for a bit, if not, for a really significant amount of time and, for the full duration that we have to watch. There's a 90% chance of developing, though, 60% within 48 hours. So we may get Gabrielle here pretty quick with this. And then we do have that next name on the list here as we're tracking things. Again, we're just going to continue to watch this here. It may take a little bit to get that name of it. It's like a depressant. At first, I know Hurricane Center are probably extra careful with this since, Puerto Rico and the like, a little bit closer there in the timeline. So it's not all about, the continental U.S. It's part, of the U.S. down there, Puerto Rico as well. And they're going to have to pay attention, that part of the U.S. is going to have to be very mindful here earlier on in the timeline. But Gabrielle, the next name on the list, Umberto after that, Imelda, Jerry, Karen, Lorenzo, Melissa, and then Nestor. I know we had, Umberto was a memorable storm. I was 7, forming so quick from, not anything really, a hurricane in parts of eastern parts of Texas, western Louisiana. Imelda was something, I believe that was the one we were watching to the east of us here, going back in the timeline. We've had so many here lately. Let me double check that. I may be getting that one mixed up a little bit because let me just make sure I get my names right here because I don't want to confuse anybody. Of course, they weren't enough of an impact to retire them, but okay, Imelda. Oh no, that was the one that hit Texas. I fixed that up a lot. That was the one that cut all that flooding. Not as bad as Harvey, but it was a big problem around Beaumont with some really catastrophic flooding there. It was Imelda in 2019. Kind of surprised that one retired, to be honest. That brings you back to storms like Alberto. Should have been retired because of all that flooding in southwest Georgia in 94. Debbie really could have been retired twice, 2012 and last year. Maybe 2012 we had a better case with all the local flooding we had from it then. And then you see some of these other names on the list. I know Karen was one when I was in college. We thought might have been issued toward FSC when it just completely fell apart. And then, so that would have been, 2013. And then Nestor was one that produced some tornadic activity there toward like Polk County in 2019, I believe. So, yeah, some of these have had a history. Gabrielle was one, I believe. Let me do the math on this. That would have been, so let me do my math here. Okay, it was, 01 actually. That was, this is something that actually happened there a few days after, one of the worst events we've ever seen in our country. September 11th, Gabrielle produced some severe weather here in the ward covered area with some very nasty weather situations. This is the same list from 01. So this repeats, as we're looking at things here, every 6 years, it's been 24 years. So, yeah, Gabrielle here, that was the end of that week there, around the 15th. It was impacting us here in toward our area here, that tropical storm. It was a hurricane, I believe, at one point, maybe at least there were hurricane warnings in play, if I recall. It wasn't something that was really memorable, obviously. What happened that Tuesday took all the headlines, rightfully so. But there were some local tornado warnings from it on that Friday. I think we lost power where I'm at here on that for a little bit. It was something, had school, and, it was obviously not the big headline, like a tropical storm impact normally would be around here. Things obviously were very, very tragic, in that week there. And even, even if it was still very impactful for some, that tropical system, it was nothing like what happened up, up toward northeast in the mid-Atlantic as we were, just seeing all that tragedy. But as we go ahead and move along, I know it's always important to have your hurricane kit up to date. And you can see here the tropical climatology. This is that time we got to start really being, vigilant. I mean, you always have to do it from June 1st, sometimes even before barrel and 2012. That's one where you have to, be vigilant even before the season. But because that was impacting Memorial Day here and those plans in 2012. So as we're looking here, though, you see the peak of hurricane season, just past Labor Day here, and we're seeing, that right now we're going to be watching something soon with probably Gabrielle, and then, around September 10th, that's when that peak is. We've had bad storms like Armadora, but again, you always have to watch all the way through. But this is a time where we have more chances, Roy, in terms of, there being more storms out there. And so we'll have to watch. I know Matthew, that's one in October. Milton was October. Michael, October. So that it's a time we're going to be paying attention even then around October 10th as well. But Helene anniversary a few weeks away. So, 1 year anniversary, that just, awful storm. As you see here, the worst tropical cyclones by county since 1850 based on my analysis of things, my subjective analysis, because it's not something where you just have one metric that says, well, you got to say this for this county because of, certain thing. It's very, uneven in that some of the stats are a lot more detailed than others based on the timeline. But since 1950, since we've been using names here in the basin, and you see all the different storms that have been what I would consider the worst by our 62 counties. It's crazy to see Levy, not Helene, or not Idalia here after what's happened the last 2 years. But that storm, 1950, just dumped feet of rain. I mean, we're talking about 50 inches or so of rain. And it was a hurricane. It was kind of looping around, so it caused a lot of wind damage as well. And then you see areas there to the north of Helene, though, so many counties is really impacted here. I don't think, myself and then other folks just haven't really talked about it enough because, it was a bad situation, but 2 caveats, well, 3 actually, when I think about it, but 2, really that stand out here. This is hidden areas that are not as big a population centers. I mean, Valdosta, Lake City are pretty big, but it's not Tallahassee, it's not Jacksonville here on this getting, this something that was the worst cyclone impact. Very well should have been, based on the forecast, could have been for Tallahassee. We're happy it wasn't. Kate still stands there. That storm from 40 years ago. That's, the unfortunate leader there for the worst cyclone impact. But it's a situation here. So Helene, for one, less population compared to where it could have hit. 2, the impact in Western North Carolina took the headlines from it because it was, just so much worse in terms of the human toll. These folks already had sufficient warning. We were talking about this for a while. Up there they had warning. They were told it could be catastrophic, but it wasn't something where people were necessarily evacuating, and, it wasn't something where, it was a scenario where people knew that it was like we told people it was going to wipe you out if you were at Horseshoe Beach or something. We said it would be catastrophic in the meteorology community in Western North Carolina, but, a lot of folks, it was something where you didn't really maybe have a plan to evacuate up there because it's not something that was really, imaginable necessarily. Even though it had happened about 100 years ago, it's just not something you would think of up there, the impact. And it did shift a little bit to track there to a little bit to the east at the last minute there, and that had, because it was moving so fast, it had implications further up to the north. The other thing, too, and this is something, we don't really talk about too much, but this did happen going into a weekend, so it made it not stay in the headlines as long, because especially in college football season, once you hit that weekend, everything kind of switches in the headlines. Not always, but, a lot of times things kind of get pushed to the side here, and then I know Michael's on Wednesday, after that, after Friday, it was kind of off the headlines, even though it's so bad for folks, Panama City especially, it kind of got out of the headlines here nationally, and Helene was on a Thursday night going into a Friday, so, really once you got to that weekend, because it didn't hit, like, the biggest population centers, it didn't hit Atlanta as bad. They had flooding, there was water rescue, very notable one, I believe it's the Fox Weather Channel, but it's a situation here where it didn't just devastate Atlanta, it didn't devastate Tallahassee, it kind of devastated areas in between here, and it just didn't get the headlines. It went from, areas there like Perry through Valdosta up, where County got it pretty hard. Waycross obviously got it pretty hard, but there's not TV stations there, not as big media organizations there. It kind of went up into Augusta, and that was something that really shifted there in Georgia. I mean, there were forecasts. If people were being warned, don't get me wrong, but the impact, nobody kind of realized how bad it was going to be for those folks up in the Augusta TV market. I wouldn't think. Not something I followed a lot, but it seemed like kind of last minute jog there made, such a powerful storm and it was moving so quick. It had a really, really bad impact on that area up toward Augusta there and in toward South Carolina, North Carolina. So a situation here that it was, going into the weekend. A lot of, I believe some of the TV stations didn't even have power up in Augusta there. And it was just kind of, when you're going into a weekend and then it kind of gets dropped, but except for Western North Carolina, which was in a dire situation, they got the headlines deservedly so. But it's a situation here where this is not, even though it stands out for so many of our local counties, it's not something that was just kind of, especially the Dahlia the year before. I mean, some areas were just already broken, trying to heal, and then this just kind of comes in. It was an odd situation because, just seeing this, when you think about it, really, just everything kind of wasn't as maybe proportional in coverage because of the areas that were hit, because of the lesser population density compared to like Duval, Leon, or even, St. John's and some of those counties here on the First Coast. I mean, it might be something to put together sometime, quite honestly, the population comparative, for some of these different counties here in our area. But, it definitely weighs. I mean, you got to look at Central and South Florida, too. I mean, you talk about some of these areas in North Florida having a lot of population, but, just reading a lot of that Florida population is not in our area even, really. It's south of Marion, most of the population in the state, I think I saw a stat, is, like south of Marion, the rest of the state here, Orlando, Tampa, Miami, West Palm in there, you have maybe more people down there. It's something like that. I know it's really late, but let me go ahead and look at that stat real quick about the Florida population. I don't know if it's something I can find right off here, but it's kind of a dramatic one that you wouldn't really think about as we're looking and as we're tracking things here. Yeah, just a huge number further south. As I look, it's just way more, Orlando and Miami, and as we're looking, I mean, I don't have a direct source, but I see like indirect answers to this. It's way more as you're looking further south. So even though we have way, enough people up here, for sure, especially in some of these population centers, it's still, when you put it all together, they are, really loaded with people further down in the state. So, even if we talk about, Tallahassee and Jacksonville being very populated, get a lot of coverage, well, in between that is where it hit, and that was even less, in terms of the population, but it's still, decent amount of people in Lake City, Live Oak, and Valdosta, Waycross, even you think of Douglas there, and Adel, but it's not the same. You don't have TV stations in that corridor. I mean, they have to go a good ways to get to the more damage there. So it's a tricky thing. There are some newspapers in there and the like, and radio stations, but you kind of get my drift here. As we're looking and as we're tracking. So this is what you need to do before a storm. Not saying there's one coming. Hopefully not. Cross our fingers. But make sure your hurricane kit is up to date. Some supplies are tax-free in Florida now on a, expect to be permanent basis here. It looks like at this point. And then a basic disaster supplies kit includes water, non-perishable food, battery-powered or hand-cranked radio, no weather radio, flashlight, and first aid kit. But and y'all see, I remember now if we had a really significant hurricane coming, towards some of our areas here. I mean, you saw even Bradford, that was a 1 to 2 with Dor, and a tropical storm to a Cat 1 with Irma for us here in Bradford. And it was still, something both for. I'm thinking of Irma myself because that was the one I was here for. That was, more impactful than the others. And you lose power for a day. Some folks a lot more. We lost it for a day here, but you may not be able to get immediate medical care, in these type of situations. I mean, the trees weren't down like that here during Irma, but, if you had something like a 2 or a 3 category impact with the winds, and then you have the trees down and you can't get out, then you can't get that medical care. So, remember ready.gov/kit, the full list available there. Some storm threats require evacuation, especially of mobile homes because of high winds. In that case, you need to really be, before you get out, secure those loose objects. But if you're staying, also secure those loose objects ahead of time. And then coastal areas that may have to evacuate because of storm surge. And in the worst case scenarios, these hazards are capable of causing total devastation. Inland flooding sometimes is a bigger concern locally. Think of Tropical Storm Faye in 2008, Debbie in 2012. You want to try to mitigate these threats here before the storm with sandbags and other items or methods. Get necessary supply of cash and gas, because maybe the credit card machines, they might not work, and they might not work for a while. I believe a couple months, I believe it was in Mariana there, after Michael went through there and the credit card machine still wasn't working 2 months later. So that's kind of the point. I mean, at a restaurant there. So you just want to get your necessary supply of cash and gas. I mean, the cash you'll eventually be able to get with banks open and the like. But, in the initial phase there, it's not going to probably 2 months. But, in the initial phase, you might not be able to get, to an ATM or a bank or something. And that might be the only way to be able to buy food, especially if it's something, if it's ready to eat. If maybe you don't have, like, some areas, more popular areas may have those trucks coming in with some hot meals, but in some areas might not be able to really get that, especially in the early stages. But gas important to be able to get to those places. I mean, because otherwise there'll be big lines of gas, at gas stations, people wanting to get gas, and then you want to target your devices as power outages could be possible before a storm comes there ahead of a storm. And then just be ready to move to an interior room in a tornadic situation. Now, your next 7 days in terms of rainfall, we see, with the boundary here that we've been watching. You see all that rain down towards South Florida. Now, we'll have to see how that impacts some games down there. But you see further up, North Florida, not as big of a deal. But still, the first coast could get a good bit of rain according to this ultimately. Tallahassee even less. But we'll watch toward the first coast. And you have the interactive radar, clutter.com/radar. Fog could be an issue, so make sure you're giving yourself extra time to reach your destination. Make sure your vehicle is as visible as possible to other vehicles by using your low beam headlights, and leave plenty of room between you and the vehicle in front of you. And these high school football, college football, and the NFL football forecast information coming on up here. You see the game here later tonight now on the radio. WEAG 106.3 in Stark area. Bradford traveling down to Sumter County. The Bushnell/Bushnell, however you want to say it. I always called it Bushnell growing up. I've heard of Bushnell lately. But low 80s here, 40% chance of rain. So a little bit higher down there than in, our viewing area. This is just south of the covered area there, where Bradford will be going to take on the South Sumter Raiders there. So we're watching that here, obviously, and we'll monitor the forecast down there. It's not too far off of I-75 down there around the Bushnell/Bushnell community. But let me go ahead and just keep on going here as we look and as we track things. This is going to be a good game, it would seem. You never know in high school, but, both teams, Bradford really, has been on the ball here these first couple weeks. They did lose to Cocoa, though, in that exhibition game. But Cy Cupboard's the quarterback for the Tornadoes, and he's been one that, has been pretty highly thought of here in terms of recruiting as we're looking across, some of those different databases and the like. But let me go ahead and look at the college football forecast now. East Texas A&M Lions there at the Florida State Seminoles. My Seminoles there in toward Tallahassee. They're in that top 15. Kind of unbelievable. And I think the last time I said it was going to be a game where FSU was going to win for sure. Well, they won, but it was a disaster. Going back to, I believe it was the last time FSU played the Lions. It was the North Alabama Lions. And we all know what happened that night there with Jordan Travis's tragic injury. So the Noles got to remain alert here to just kind of staying safe. I mean, don't just, play to not get hurt. But, you just got to be kind of aware here that we got to be careful in these type of conditions. If it's with a running quarterback, we could get him or somebody else injured here. And it's a situation you can't take for granted, especially after that fateful night there that, even if you should have been in the playoffs, as we always talk about, some folks use that as an excuse to not put them in the playoffs there. That tragic injury to Jordan Travis, who never, has played again. He's now out of the NFL there, retiring from the sport after that tragedy on that field where his leg, was just so badly impacted. But as we're looking here, low 90s, 30% chance of rain. So the rain chance isn't too big, but you never know, something could pop up. If you want to be extra careful, bring that poncho, sure. I mean, that wouldn't be my focus as much this week as it was last week, obviously. If you had something pop up, you could get lightning in theory. We really talked about it a lot last week. The lightning didn't happen. The rain did happen there in Tallahassee, unlike other places, though, and folks did get wet. It wasn't just overwhelming, but some points there, downpour action, for sure. But, poncho's not the worst thing to take there, but the concern for the dangerous heat is something we got to be aware of. Maybe wear a hat. You gotta maybe put some of that sunscreen on there as we're looking and as we're tracking things. Also, just kind of a situation here as we're looking at the scenario that you just want to make sure you're staying hydrated. You just want to make sure you're drinking plenty of water here in this type of scenario. Just be extra careful with that heat around. And then as we look toward Gainesville, their game's at 4:15 on the SEC Network. FSU noon on ACC Network. The Gators 4:15 on SEC Network. They're going to take on South Florida, who looked really, really, really impressive against Boise State. So either South Florida comes in here, and there might be a few options, especially after how we predicted FSU last week. I mean, that was one of the most stunning things. We'll go back to it real quick. I mean, last game, and the only game I can think of that was like that for FSU. Really not any for FSU. I'm sorry, for college football, that since I've been watching the 2006 USC-UCLA game, I thought USC was going to win easily. Instead, UCLA won. If USC would have won, Florida would not have won a national title that season. Instead, USC lost. UCLA had won that one. Florida got in the championship game instead. I know there's a debate between Michigan and Ohio State there. Maybe had getting a rematch. Michigan didn't get in after losing, though, but it would have been, Ohio State, USC more than likely for the championship if it wasn't for that incredible upset, epic proportions there. USC losing to UCLA out there in California. I mean, that was when I thought, that's the only game I ever thought a team would win by like 40 or 50, and they didn't. USC, they lost to Alabama. They lost to my Seminoles. I'll take this FSU one. Of course, our Gator fans around will take what happened back then because I won the national title, basically. Even USC probably winning it that year. They've at least been going against Ohio State. And, I guess Ohio State could have won that too. But my point being is it's just remarkable how little things can change everything there in terms of the sport. But as we go ahead and look here, South Florida at Florida and Gainesville, dangerous heat, definitely something. But South Florida, is a team that is capable of beating Florida after what we saw last Thursday night there. An incredible win there for them. One of their biggest, maybe in the history of the school, against Boise State in terms of the magnitude. I mean, I would have ranked them. I mean, I had them in my playoff here. It's the group of five, whatever you want to call that slot. That's how impressed I was by them. But they're going to have some tough games. They're playing Florida and Miami as we look ahead in the timeline. Both of those are very tough. Doesn't mean they won't make the playoff anyway if they went out besides those two. But if they were to win that, they would probably be, up there in the top 20, top 15 in the rankings, you would think, as we're looking at things. I mean, if Florida wins, especially if it's a convincing win, they could really jump up there. They're playing LSU coming up soon, and, that could really set up, a huge game there in terms of college football, just overall, headlines there. Used to it be, if it's a 4-team playoff or a 2-team, you could say, well, it might decide to go to the playoff, but, it could, but it may not. Florida has a really, really, really tough schedule this year. I'm saying that as an FSU fan. I mean, as of now, it looks like, maybe the toughest schedule in the whole country. I mean, they play Texas. They play LSU. Some of these games on the road. Play Georgia there in Jacksonville, obviously. They always do. They're playing FSU, of course. And there's teams I'm leaving out. I mean, they got a really tough schedule, though, as we're tracking things. Some of those games pretty close, together even. So it's just incredible the tough schedule they got this year. They have to go to College Station. They have Miami, of course, which they have to go to Miami. It doesn't get much crazier than that as we're looking at things. After this week, it's at LSU, at Miami, and then hosting Texas after a bye. Then going to Texas A&M, then they get a little bit of a lull against Mississippi State, I would call it, but they're not, at home it probably win, but then against Georgia and Jacksonville, Kentucky's a lull kind of, but then Ole Miss and Tennessee back-to-back weeks there before they go to, host that game there against my Seminoles. So, yeah, a lot going on there in terms of that, obviously. as we're looking and as we're tracking things there, obviously. So let's go ahead and just be focused on that heat there too. And we gotta watch that from Jacksonville. Carolina Panthers coming to Jacksonville to take on the Jacksonville Jaguars there. And low 90s, 40% chance of rain. It's gonna be hot, but the breeze will be a little bit more, more felt there probably. And northeastern, type of wind there, northeastern breeze, out of that northeast direction. And one thing we should mention, after a few years from now here, I know this game on Fox, 1 o'clock kick, two expansion teams from the 90s going at it. And you see their rain chance didn't just, overwhelm them, but something to watch. Have that poncho on hand just in case. Generally you're not allowed to take umbrellas into these, events here. But low 90s as we're looking. So that's hot. But again, a little bit of a wind. We got to wear that sunscreen at least to, have that on, I would say. Because if you don't, those clouds aren't out. Maybe we'll get more clouds and that can help a little. But sun's still going to burn you as UV rays there. But in a few years, the stadium renovations are going to be dramatic, it would seem. And there'll be a cover there where, well, maybe a little bit of the rain can get in. I think it's going to be something like the LA Rams have from what I've heard. But by 2028, the plan is, going to have a cover on it all like LA does. So there could be a little bit of a crack where rain can get in, something like that. But overall, it's going to be a situation here where could have a weather delay, I guess, with the lightning if you have, just because of that, but overall, you're not going to feel the weather impacts anymore, especially the heat. And most people aren't going to feel the rain unless there's like a lightning delay, because lightning, if there's any crack and any rain can get in anywhere, you still have to have the lightning delay. But that 40% rain there, it'd be something where you're only worried about the lightning and you're not worried about the heat, really, or the cold weather coming in. It would be, more of something that is going to be preset here and, kind of take this graphic away almost, except we just have to watch out for lightning a little bit there in some instances, occasional weeks in the calendar. So that's something to look at. Next year, the plan is, reduce capacity there. 2027 plan in a different stadium. Don't think they've decided yet, but it's between Gainesville and Orlando. And in 2028, all those renovations and play there. See if Jacksonville eventually hosts another Super Bowl like they did back in Super Bowl 39. That was such a big deal, obviously, when I was a kid. Duval had that Super Bowl there, and it was, a big event with New England beating Philadelphia there. Bill Belichick, at that point, it was a dynasty. He had a dynasty with him and Tom Brady, and now, for his sake, this past week against North Carolina, or against TCU for North Carolina, it didn't go so well. But you just never know, obviously, with all that. But some, memories from many years ago. They had Donovan McNabb there in that Super Bowl, and Andy Reid, who's been the coach of note here, coach of record here lately, being in the, headlines for being that Super Bowl winner so many times with Patrick Mahomes. But yeah, that was back in Super Bowl 39. Did Jacksonville maybe eventually get another Super Bowl hosting opportunity? That'll be a story we're looking at here later on and toward the timeline, obviously, as we were, thinking about that. As we go ahead and say now that extended forecast, though, a 30% chance of rain on that Friday, 40% on that Saturday, Sunday, 50% on that Monday, 60% on Tuesday. So it starts to go up some, rain chances do, but then those temperatures go down some with more clouds around and a boundary trying to come in, and it gets just a little below average for some of those highs. And now those lows this morning were below average here. We're at 66 now here east of Stark. Guys, I look at my thermometer in my rural area. 69 is what I'm going with, though, because of some of the coastal locations and the like. So that's kind of the storyline here with that forecast. You see that progressing there with the temperatures, and something that we'll kind of watch. I know since we're on so late here with this, very late, if you're watching live, let me go ahead and look at my European model information here right now behind the scenes, as far as I can go here, because we're on this late. It's important to kind of get an idea of what could happen. And right now, let me make sure I'm looking at this right. It's not really picking up too much on anything here for a while. Eventually, maybe something else further out. I don't think it's the same area that we've been talking about, though, it develops. So I'm not even guarantee all those models are getting kind of bullish with things. There's still a chance it doesn't really develop into something too crazy. And in fact, guess what? Our statistical models just updated. We're on so late here. It's a pretty big shift. So let me go ahead and see, guys, this real quick before we wrap it up. I'll go ahead and move away from the graphics. So let's just shift it here now. The 6Z has got downtrended pretty dramatically. Doesn't mean, it'll have, that impact here differently. It could end up being worse because you could end up having a situation here if it gets further south. It doesn't stay as, maybe, or let me tell you again, it doesn't get as strong. Sometimes stronger systems can pull north. They could ride routes, longer, miss some of these more mountainous islands, and then get together and then become an issue. But, longer range. Because this is Wednesday, it's still on a Cat 1 now, our TVCN consensus. The HWFI hurricane model is still on a strong tropical storm. The EFS is still on a Cat 1 there, approaching areas there in the Caribbean. So we shall see. That's toward next Friday there, so a week from now. Again, the European really not showing that much, at least to 240 hours. I know there's a way to look at it longer, but I don't have that up yet. But here, this is 268 hours. It's showing it instead of like a 3 or a 4, like so some of these were showing at the start of the broadcast. It's showing tropical storm or category 1, which is still very noteworthy. That it's showing that, because if it's completely falling apart, it might not show anything down here. You see some of these is pressing for a while with this, so still noteworthy. Don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean it wouldn't be an impact toward our area, but it's showing something weaker, which could be good news for Puerto Rico here, but very, very early. We can't give, an all clear. We can't say it's going to be a big threat yet either way for even Puerto Rico, much less the continental U.S. So we're a long ways away on that. Let's see what these are showing, the latest updates on these. These are in, and yeah, the TVCN's kind of going a little closer though toward Honolulu with this, it would seem. Could just be an illusion because of where the dot's showing the timeline, but we're looking at our time, 2 a.m. Eastern Wednesday, so late Tuesday night coming in there right along, some of these areas. This is toward Maui in the light there, and then in toward Honolulu. It's still tropical storm that gets past there, so I could have some, pretty big impacts. Not, just extreme, but something that, sometimes these hit the big island, just fall apart or go north or south, and this goes right over them, but kind of misses the big island some. And it could be something that's a little bit different. And some of these I've seen just to kind of fall completely apart. That's what GFS was kind of showing, and this could be overdoing it in the statistical models here. But you see a tropical storm in there, 45 knots, 38 knots, or in that area. So that could be, something where that has some impact there for them Tuesday into Wednesday and this coming week there toward parts of Hawaii with Hurricane Kiko, which at the last check there is a category, and I'm just going to double check here, 3 hurricane. So that's the update, 125 mile an hour max sustained winds, the minimum pressure 954, but expected to kind of strengthen back up a little bit, and extending this out from the official track, which is the white dot. You see here these other dot colors. The TVCN would generally, but kind of what the Hurricane Center is going to go pretty, much with. Not always, but that's the consensus here in the models. Now the blue dots, that's one thing that the hurricane models sometimes simulate these intensities better, and it's so under press, and what's in it would probably be pretty decayed by then and be quite a bit lesser of an issue. So that'd be good news. You never know in Hawaii. A couple years ago, we had Dora, not our Dora, that impacted us in 64, obviously, but 2 years ago, we had Dora down there. It got retired, I believe, in the Pacific because of, the impact where the gradient ended up causing those winds to be so strong and spreading wildfires there and caused catastrophe with so many fatalities there. Kind of, in some ways, that was so indirect, but still devastating with all the fatalities from the wildfires there. And then, we had the situation in central Texas, of course, with the remnants of that tropical system coming out of Mexico several days later. So it's crazy that even a very indirect impact from a tropical system can be devastating, in part with other meteorological issues going on in an area, drought out there, and some more of, that moisture coming into play, organizing with things in north central Texas, but in the word the Hill Country with all that, all those fatalities. Okay, that's pretty much do it here for tonight. Thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks so much for trusting me. We'll pop in if needed. As we're looking ahead to days to come, probably more than anything, there'll be more about it. One of our games here got delayed. One of these football games had some lightning impacts on, there's 4 we're talking about. We'll just kind of play it by ear. That'd be, the more likely situation. Doubt we're going to get any warnings, especially initially. Eventually, next week we might start getting some warnings popping up here again. But, as we're going through the weekend, not as much of a chance of that, but I definitely could have some of these games with some lightning, impacts here. Talking about those four that I mentioned, probably do a cut in if any of those four did. Bradford's, if it's a few minutes or something, it might not. But the other three, if something's coming together with that, I know that NFL game up tonight in Philadelphia, not something that would be, maybe impacted directly too many people. Granted, maybe impacting some sleep schedules, but indirectly impacting some folks, but not something for us to cut in for one morning or anything. But definitely dangerous to the lightning around. That's why you always got to remember whenever thunder roars, you got to go indoors. But yeah, when we have anything pop up around here, we'll, be on if we need to be, of course. With that Raiders team going for that FSU Alabama game last Saturday, and then some of those traffic cameras afterward. But also just, the heat's probably the bigger story this weekend. We got to kind of hype that up a little bit. One more time, I don't want to be reading in the papers here in the days to come that we've had people, get really sick from the heat. We've seen almost every year this time of year with all that sun out and, folks having to be transported because they get overwhelmed by the heat. So make sure you're drinking plenty of water, wear light color, loose fitting clothes, put that sunscreen on, maybe wear a hat to kind of keep yourself, your head in a little cooler. Let's be taking precautions here because this heat is not anything to play around with. We hope maybe for some clouds but not rain. It could keep things feeling a little cooler. Maybe get that breeze in there, especially in the Jacksonville on Sunday, be a little more likely there. But yeah, we got to be kind of careful. We're not cutting in for the heat necessarily. Not expecting to have to do that. But we got to be really careful because that FSU game, especially right there, the sun, in that early afternoon, those noon games are not fun. And when it's in the 90s, like we're expecting, that is kind of your, biggest concern. I know, new stadium set up there and the like, be the first one in all this heat. This time of year, it's an issue right at a noon kickoff there on the ACC network, and definitely could cause some folks some problems. And that was put on that calendar, folks are worried and they need to be concerned. Don't, just like last week. I mean, you go to the game, and hope for the best, and things very much work out on the field this week. Assuming there's not any injuries of the football players here, as what happened last time FSU played the Lions there, North Alabama in 2023. FSU should win that one, but obviously you got to be, there could be cramps with the players too. That's something to watch out for. But obviously the fans need to stay hydrated. Wear the sunglasses there. Just be very, very careful. Again, just like with the Alabama game there last week, go to the game, try to enjoy things, but be extra careful here because you don't want something bad to happen. And then, Gainesville, 4 o'clock or so kicks, tailgaters especially could have some issues. Granted, outside the stadium are going to be, maybe, have a little bit easier access in a way to water depending on where you're at. But again, just be very mindful here. And then, that Jaguar game, first one of the year up in Duval for the Jags, regular game. It's against Carolina, another team that entered the NFL the same year, back in the 90s, and the other expansive franchise. And they've been to the Super Bowl twice, haven't won it. Jaguars, they've never been to the Super Bowl. Maybe this will be the year they at least get there, if not win it. New coach, you never know in the NFL. Liam Cohen there with Trevor Lawrence, and that kicker, though, what a weapon Cam Little is. We haven't really talked about him, but he had that 70-yarder in the preseason. Can't just always rely on him, but he really, has that big leg there on that football field. So that's really exciting for Jacksonville as we're looking at things and as we're tracking things there. So maybe, you don't want just the kicker to be the best player, obviously, but he definitely could be a difference maker and change the record. Maybe instead of winning 6 games, maybe he wins you 9 games and gets you to the playoffs. And that he wins 3 of them. That's what I mean by that. But you get what I'm saying. Instead of winning 6, they win 9 because he wins 3 of them for you. But you get what I'm saying there. I know it's late, but you kind of get what I'm talking about there, though. But Jacksonville, just be careful of the weather there, too. First game of the season. It's one of those 1 o'clock games. Be very careful there. I know it's on Fox. Now, I do need to mention, it's only on Fox in the Jacksonville TV market as of now. Gainesville market, Tallahassee market, Albany market, Savannah market. You kind of get the idea. I believe they're also in the Atlanta game, Tampa, Tampa Bay Buccaneers there. They're going to be coming up to Atlanta for that one, I believe. So they'll be inside, but that's a big game, obviously, in the NFC South. That's a big one for sure. As we're looking at that, as we're tracking that. That'll be on Sunday at 1 on Fox in most of the markets, but Jacksonville market will be so in the Jacksonville game, where the weather could have that impact. So just be careful. Be careful with these weather conditions, obviously, because it's a little hot. We'll have to watch out for a passing storm, obviously. Not the worst thing to take a poncho, but about the heat, that's what could really be dangerous here, in that you're not thinking about it as much. The weather, if you have a lightning strike around, obviously, granted it doesn't happen right there, which sometimes it can. That's very significant and serious, but, that heat could be the big problem there just right off the bat. Catching folks off guard and, having folks suffer from heat exhaustion, and that's not good, obviously. So make sure you're drinking plenty of water, wearing that light colored, loose fitting clothes, those clothes, and then wearing that hat, something like that, a sunscreen. Just stay hydrated. It's so, so important there as we're looking, but there could be a little bit of a breeze from the northeast there for that game at Everbank Field. So that's the contest, storyline right now for that one, and for some of those other football contests around our area, those games. So that's going to do it. Have a great night. Stay safe. We'll be back here again as warranted. Otherwise, the next one will update late Tuesday, early Wednesday.